Hey everybody, this is Joshua, the tendonitis expert. And this video is about Achilles tendon rupture. And if you have a rupture, you're probably going to need surgery. So, since we're looking at the picture, this is the picture that's not uncommon for people who've had Achilles tendon rupture. Depending on the size of the rupture, what's going on in there, they might do the surgery where they put in a couple incisions and they stick tools through there to visualize and cut and such. But depending on what you have going on, they might need to open you up so they can visualize and have easy access to what's going on in there. Often when the tendon gets ruptured, the tendon shoots up that way because the muscle bunches, so it pulls the tendon up that way. So they might have to reach up there and grab it and pull it back down. Anywho, so there's two options for tendon rupture, and that's partial and full. So, partial and full. Obviously, if it's a full rupture, it totally separates. If it's partial rupture, it only separates partly in that, let's say that there's your tendon and you rip halfway. That's a partial rupture. Whereas rupture full, you end up with something that looks like that. So you knew that, but we're just covering the basics here. So what do you do for a tendon rupture? For both these scenarios, partial and full, there's essentially these three options. So let's start with partial. Let's say you have a partial tear. Depending on your age and your overall health and your activities and what the doctors think of the MRI, if they take a look, you kind of got the three options, which is they're going to do nothing. And they're going to say, well, there's nothing we can really do. Or in your scenario, there's nothing really to do, or surgery is too much risk for you if you're like 80 or something, then they might just do nothing. But generally, they're going to put you in a boot or a cast to immobilize you into a shortened position. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And hope that the tear heals itself. So depending whether you have a 5% tear or a 10% tear or a 50% tear, that all kind of helps determine what the doctors think is best for you. If they do nothing, or if they cast or put you in a boot for partial, they can also do surgery where they cut into you and they reattach the partial. So they try to bring these two areas together right here, staple it, suture it, whatever they think they can do. In the scenario of a full rupture, sometimes they still will do nothing. They might say, well, you're 75 and you don't get around a whole lot, and it looks like you can actually stand on it without a problem. You just can't move very well, but you can't move very well anyway, and surgery is too much of a risk for you. So they might just choose to do nothing. And or they'll put you in a cast or a boot and hope for the best. Again, if you have a rupture like this, it's incredibly unlikely that that is going to heal back together all by itself. So if they put you in a cast or a boot, no matter what your age is, if you have a full rupture, just know that the chances aren't great. So you might want to inquire why they're doing that. Usually within a full Achilles tendon rupture, you can't even put weight on the foot in most cases. Some cases you can. It just kind of depends on where the tear happens and what's going on in there. But for the most part, if there's a full rupture, you're going to need to have surgery. If they just cast you or put you in a boot for long term, hoping it heals, in my opinion, that's not the best strategy. Because what if you wait 4 months or 6 months and it doesn't heal, and then you're set up for even more problems along the line. So if you have a full rupture, you're probably going to need surgery. It's just not going to heal back by itself. You might be able to get by without it, meaning you might be able to live with limited mobility, etc., and avoid the risk of surgery. But in general, regardless of your age, if it's a full rupture, you're going to need surgery. If it's a partial rupture, it kind of depends on how big and bad it is. But if it tore already, chances are it's going to tear again and or tear more. So whether you have surgery or not, you're going to end up in a cast or a soft cast or a boot because they want to immobilize you. They want to immobilize you such that those two ends have a chance of healing, or a partial tear has a chance of healing. They don't want you walking around putting more pull on that tear spot to have more tear or to prevent healing. So that's what the cast is for. So what causes a tendon to rupture? Is it just sudden force or too much load? Yes and no. If a piano falls on you, then that's too much load and the body just can't take that much force, so you can get tears. But in the case of, for instance, a runner's running down the road and his Achilles tendon ruptures, that's not a case of too much force or sudden force. That's a case of lack of function. So you can have more function or less function. The less function you have, the increased risk you have of a rupture. So what does that mean? So you have muscles. All sorts of muscles, we don't need to name them. You just know that you have muscles and connective tissue, and that attaches to the tendon. Now these muscles are supposed to contract and relax, and their job is to absorb force. So your foot hits the ground, these muscles are supposed to fire and absorb force. To the extent that they don't absorb force, that force has to go somewhere. It can go up to the knee, it can go to any particular spot on the tendon, you can go to the ankle, just all depends on your specific scenario, but that force has to go somewhere. If you have a tear, a rupture right here, then it's safe to say that that force went to that spot. And tendons really aren't designed to absorb force. Muscles are designed to absorb force. So over time, if too much force is landing right here, it's going to structurally fail. Now, why might it do that? What does lack of function mean? Lack of function really means that this muscle, as I said, isn't working correctly. Why isn't it doing that? One primary reason is because of tightness, muscle and connective tissue tightness. Ideally, the muscle should be this long, but realistically, the whole muscle or parts of the muscle become, for instance, this long or this long, depending on which fibers or bunches of fibers you're talking about in here. So the tighter a muscle is, the less ability it has to contract and absorb force. So over time, when you move your muscles, contract and relax, every time you relax, your body retains a certain tiny amount of that contraction. So over time, you get tighter and tighter and tighter. And then when they're short like this, over time, connective tissue shrink wraps. So then you're stuck short and tight, so you can't even relax. So now you're running down the road or walking down the road or standing at work. These muscles are too tight, they're stuck too tight, they can't function very well, which means they're not absorbing force like they should. That force still has to go somewhere. If you had a rupture, that's where the force was going. So surgery is necessary to reconnect this right here. Again, it's highly unlikely that it's going to heal back together without surgery. But even if you do get surgery and it heals back together, you still have this tightness. So part of a faster and better recovery from surgery is reversing all the factors that caused the rupture in the first place. It's important to know that running or standing at work was not the cause of the rupture. Even football players who run down the field, jumping, etc., they don't tear because of too much sudden force. They tear because their muscles aren't able to function correctly and thus can't absorb the force. So, muscle connective tissue tightness, chronic inflammation process, and chronic nutritional insufficiency. I'm not going to say much about these because I say it elsewhere, but these are the three factors that cause muscles to function poorly, which set you up for rupture. And again, these three factors are still in place after surgery. So when people have a slow recovery and or they recover but they still can't run very well, or they can't jump very well, or they're feeling pain or feeling weakness, it's because the factors that caused the rupture are still in place. So that's important to know when you're going into surgery and or when you're recovering from surgery. If you'd like to find out more about Achilles tendonitis rupture, visit my website, tendonitisexpert.com/Achilles-tendon-rupture.html. There's a link to that page underneath the video. And of course, I recommend my Reversing Achilles Tendonitis program. This is both to keep your structures healthy and functioning to avoid rupture, and post-surgery, the exact same activities will help you recover better and faster by reducing and eliminating the factors that caused the rupture in the first place that are still in play and will still be putting negative input into your healing.